And alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together.
We're here, alibis. What you know? Sorry, I had some audio issues and there was no way I could go on with it like that. So, doing well. Can everybody hear me okay? First off, I just want to make sure you guys aren't hearing anything really weird.
I hear you fine.
Okay. I'm glad you can hear me fine. Everybody's good. Okay. So, we're going to pick back up in our reading of Jake's testimony. Hey guys, I appreciate y'all being patient. I'm so sorry we're late, but you would not have want to stay around if you heard what Big E just had to hear on my microphone. So, first off, before we get started, big thanks to Big E for getting these for us. They're going to throw out some links in the chat if you're able. Shoot him a little donation. He did pay out of pocket for these. They were not cheap. He won't let me say how much, but let's just say it's probably more than a car payment every month. So, and also just to clarify, I want to make something super, super clear. Other than the first 2 or 3 minutes last time, everything that we've read has not had ad lib. This is from his testimony. So when we're reading right off the paper, um, and we're not making any of this stuff up. This is legit what he testified to. So where we left off, Big E, we were talking about going to Kenneth.
Yeah.
So we are going to start Big E on page. They talked about Jake going over to Dana, setting up the crib for Hannah Mae. They had already been there and murdered Dana, Little Chris, and Hannah Mae. So we're going to pick up around the time where they are going to Kenneth's house. So we'll start on 214 line line 14, Biggie. So I'm reading the part of Prosecutor Canepa. Biggie is Jake. So before the night of the homicides, did you attempt to, and then she says, did you attempt to leave any doors unlocked or anything like that to make re-entry easier?
No, the crib was just for the crib.
Okay. So did the three of you exit Dana's residence together?
Yes.
And what did you do then?
I can't remember if I locked the door, but we got back to Chris's truck and we drove past Chris's house. I was driving. No, I'm sorry. No, we stopped at Chris's house and George got out of our truck and then I drove first. Well, yeah, I drove first and we went to Kenneth's. Not down Left Fork or one or both times. There was two times for Kenneth. One time was coming one direction, the other time was going the other direction. I think that second time was going with down Left Fork with the passenger side of the truck being on the driveway side. No, yes, no, I'm not sure. Somehow, at the point of going to Kenneth's, George had pulled off to a pull off, technically the end of a driveway, about a mile or so from Kenneth's at the end of Left Fork, while me and Dad went to Kenneth's. Once we pulled in, I pulled up to the front of Kenneth's camper, left the headlights on. Dad said to wait here. He got out, walked up to the door, beat on the door a few times, and nobody answered. He opened the door, walked in, shut the door behind him. I saw a muzzle flash, a second, maybe 2 seconds, and he walked out. At that point, I turned the headlights off. I got out. We went over to Kenneth's grow room. Once it was opened, there was no security hard drive. there was a trail camera in one of the trees beside, looking down from a tree to the front door of the grow room. I had gotten that trail camera. Once Dad had come out of the grow room, we got back in the truck, and on our way out, I had noticed a motion detector on a tree. I was going to stop and get it, and he said it was just a motion detector, so not to worry about it. So I left it. We went out, turned right, went down the road. I think he flashed his flashlight or something, and George pulled out behind us, and we went back to Chris's. I parked his truck in the same place it was. George and I got in well, George was already in our Chevy. He repositioned to the passenger side. I got in the back seat. Before I got in, I had locked Chris's door and tossed the keys inside and shut the door. Then we got back in the Chevy. I was in the back seat, Dad was driving, George was in the passenger seat, and we went home.
Okay, before I get started, can everybody hear me now? I just want to make sure. Give me a yay or a nay if it's better. Okay, so we're good to go now. Sorry, guys. I had to unplug something and now I forgot to adjust something else. All right, here we go. Okay, let me slow you down a little bit there. You indicated after Dana's, you went back to Chris's, and at that time, George got into the truck that you had arrived in with the false bed,
Yes,
and he drove that vehicle.
George,
George did. Okay, and who was driving Chris's truck?
I was
And do you recall when you got to 772, which direction did you go? There's an objection overruled.
to the right.
And you indicated, well, let me ask you this. Did you go the same way you had gone the first time?
I don't think so.
And you just discussed the passenger side versus the driver's side of the vehicle. What was that the same or different on your second trip to Left Fork? There's objection overruled.
You're asking on Left Fork Road, correct?
Yes.
It was one or the other. On 772, you can take two different turns and go two different ways.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. And so my question is, when you were traveling on Left Fork on the road that Kenneth lived, when you first went by his house, were you traveling in the same direction on that road as you were the second time you went down to his house?
No.
Okay, so opposite directions.
Yes.
And you indicated where was it that George pulled off? Like, can you describe what it was?
I had thought it was a pull off. It's actually a driveway. It's about a mile at the end of Left Fork, the far end, not the 772 side.
And then you indicated you were driving. And again, this was in Chris's truck, correct?
Yes.
And you left the headlights on and your father got out of the vehicle and went into Kenneth's home?
Yes.
Did he appear to have to force entry into that home? There's an objection,
N-
overruled. You can answer the
No.
question.
No.
And when your dad exited the home, who was it that went to the grow?
Dad.
And once again, did he appear to have to force entry into that grow?
I think he used the key. There was no forced entry
And how did you know it was a grow?
because I went to the door, but I did not go in.
And you indicated there was a trail cam in a tree. Where was the tree in reference to his residence?
To the right,
So if I'm facing the residence,
it would be, it was in, it would be to the right of to the right of Kenneth's camper up the hill and a pine tree. It was directly in front of the grove.
and how were you able to know where that was?
Seen it.
And if you could just help me understand that, is it still dark out at that time?
No, this is when the headlights was on.
And how far up the tree was it? How did you get to it?
10 or so feet, maybe something like that. I really can't specifically how I got up there to get. There could only been two options. One is to climb the tree, or two, there was a ladder nearby. I remember getting the camera. I just don't remember how.
And did you look anywhere else on the property for cameras or surveillance systems?
Other than inside the grow room, I took a quick peek in because I was looking for the camera. I didn't see any, and Dad indicated it was not a, what do you call it? Something to put a lot of effort in, because I'm assuming he had been there before.
And then you indicated that you left that residence.
Yes,
Do you know did either of you or your father collect any phones from that residence?
I did not go in.
Real quick, somebody's asking if I can do closed captions. For some reason, YouTube a lot of times won't let you have closed captions when it's live, but if the mods know what to do, I'm putting them on it. But I've tried before and I apologize. Sometimes they have to populate after we're done. And do you know if there was any shell casings collected at that residence?
I do not.
Not by you.
Well, again, I didn't go in, so
Then you indicated you drove back past where George had pulled off, correct?
yes,
And who was driving at that point?
I was.
And you said something like, I don't know if he flashed his lights. Who are you referring to?
My father, I can't remember specifically, but I believe he did flash his flashlight out.
There's an objection. It's overruled. He flashed what out the window?
A flashlight.
What kind of flashlight did your dad have with him that night?
I don't remember.
Did you have a flashlight at all?
I don't believe I did.
And do you know if George had a flashlight that night?
I don't know.
Then when you got back to Chris Sr.'s, where did you park the vehicle?
In the same spot that I had pulled it out of.
And you indicated you locked the door and put the keys inside
Yes.
of Chris's truck?
Yes.
Did you re-enter his residence at that time?
No.
And you indicated then you got in the original vehicle that you arrived in, correct?
Yes.
And who was driving at that point?
My dad.
And who was in the back seat at that time?
I was
And where was George?
in the passenger seat.
And where did you go from there?
Back to our house at Peterson.
Let's see. All right. So they break for the day here, and that is the end of volume 1, y'all. We made it through that. We probably could have finished that the other night, but I ain't lying, y'all. I was on the struggle bus by the end of that one the other night. We're not going 3 hours tonight, by the way. No way. Okay, so we're gonna pick right back up. Are you ready to roll, Big E?
Yeah, I think.
Okay. So it says they talk about at the conclusion of yesterday, they talked about when they returned to Peterson Road. So a couple of things I wanted to go back to the night of homicides itself. Can you tell us, you talked about when you went to Chris Sr.'s residence that second time to recover the phones? We're top of page 234.
Okay. Hang on. Let me get there, because
Yeah, that's cool. So people are asking about the transcripts. They are super, super expensive, and Big E will not let me put out how much he paid for them, but it was a lot of money, a ton, way more than you would think, probably between a car and a house payment every month. And that's just how it is. So yeah, that's a lot of people have been asking about transcripts. They're hundreds and hundreds of dollars just for these two, for Angela and Jake. Let me know when you're ready, Big E.
okay, I'm on 234.
Okay, you noticed a lot of blood on the floor.
Yes.
After you exited that residence, did you do anything to your feet or your shoes because of that blood?
I don't think so.
Did you do anything to remove the blood at all? And there's an objection overruled, and then they allow Jake to answer.
No, I don't think I did.
You talked about the phone jammer, the signal jammer. Who had that with them on the night of the homicides?
My father.
And can you tell us when it was decided that you would take Chris's truck to the various locations?
I believe it was an on-the-spot decision.
Okay. And were you part of that discussion or decision?
No.
When was it decided that George would go to that turnaround near Kenneth's house? There's an objection back and forth. So where was it that George pulled off near Kenneth's residence?
The head of a driveway pull-off area.
Pull off area. When was it decided he would go there?
I don't know.
You were not part of that discussion or decision?
No.
Once you get back to Peterson Road, do you recall what time you said you got back approximately?
4:30-ish a.m.
And what did you do once you got there?
We had parked in the new barn. No. Yes. Parked in the new barn. I had, after we all had gotten out, removed all of our exiting clothing. I had removed all the floor mats from the vehicle, and I had put all of that. I think I'd put all of that at that time into a burn barrel to burn, and burnable items I had taken. I can't remember the order, but I had taken the firearms that I had, used a grinder, portable grinder, to cut up in smaller pieces, and then proceeded to use a cutting torch to melt the firearms. I didn't have enough material supplies to finish the job, so only partially destroyed, and I had put them into a duffel bag. And as this was happening, my father had taken the truck and he had taken it to another location. I was not aware of where at the time, and while he did that, I had proceeded to dig a hole inside the barn to bury the duffel bag for a later date in that order. Once we had removed our clothes, we went to the house to get redressed. After we were redressed, that's when my dad had taken the truck to another location and I had proceeded to dig the hole.
Just real quick, one thing I just noticed, he admitted to digging that hole, but they were saying that George dug it. Isn't that right?
We'll eventually get to it that they both dug.
Okay, gotcha.
George
Okay,
dug it.
yeah. So you said when you got back, you pulled into the same barn that you had originally left from.
Yes.
You removed your clothes.
Yes.
What part of your clothing did you remove?
Everything but the boxers,
Shirt, shoes.
pants, gloves, mask, hat, whatever we was wearing.
And did George and your father do the same thing?
Yes.
And then where were those items put?
They were put into an old feed trough, metal feed trough that we had used as a burn pile, a burn pit
And where was that old feeding trough?
in the barn.
Was that there normally, or was that specifically placed there for this?
It was in there normally. I had decided to use it on the spot once we had returned.
And what about the false bed? Was that also disassembled?
Before my father had left, it was just lifted out like I had tossed a bell. It was just like rough them off to the side, toss them, probably would have covered out, and he had left. Eventually, I disassembled it.
And at this point, is anybody helping you disassemble that or get it out of the truck?
Yes,
And who is helping you?
My brother participated.
Okay, and you indicated after you had your clothing off, you said you put it into the metal trough. Did you burn it at that time before you went into the home to get your other clothes, or did you go get your other clothes first?
We went to get redressed first because it was still dark.
And was your clothing in the house?
Yes, in the closet.
Okay. So you had not left them in any particular place. You just went into your various rooms to get clothing, or tell me about that.
Uh, I don't know what they did. I just went back upstairs and got in my clothing, put my normal clothes on.
And then once you were in your regular clothing, what happened to them?
Then I went back to the barn. It was still dark at the time. So at that point is when I think at that point is when I had started to melt, proceeded to try to destroy the firearm. I think that's when I did that. I say I think because I don't quite remember if I did that immediately on the night before I buried them or if I buried them and removed them later at a different date and tried to destroy them later. I think I had done it that night. I believe it was that night that I had put it in the duffel bag and yeah, put it in the duffel bag because I had ran out of supplies and then proceeded to bury the duffel bag in the barn.
Tell me about that. How did you bury them? Was there already a hole? Did you dig a hole? What happened?
No, I decided to dig a hole because I had ran out of supplies. That's what it was. So I could pull it all out at a later date. No, there was not already a hole. I had to dig it that night or that morning.
Could you tell us where in the barn that would have been? Would it be where some of the stalls are now?
In line with the stalls because the stalls not were not built. I removed one of the stall support beams for the roof, dug the hole under it, and afterwards put it on top of the duffel bag to make it look like it was just a post in the hole.
And when you were doing that, when you dug that hole again, did you have any help digging that hole?
Yes,
And who helped you?
my brother.
You indicated that your brother was heavier at the time of these homicides than he is currently. Did you have any observations or experience with how strong your brother was?
Yes,
How would you describe his level of strength?
strong as a bull.
And would you say he was more or less strong than you were?
More.
And if you don't mind me using this diagram of this picture, I guess, if you can just use this and just tell us the path when you were pulling in and out of the barn, that truck that you used that night, can you tell us, first of all, which barn were you in? He was using a visual. We do not have that, by the way, guys.
Um, so do you want me to?
Well, I'll pick up on line 6. What path would you have taken when you left the residence and then when you returned?
Okay. The dirt road. Actually, I can't remember if it was the first drive or the second drive. It was one or the other.
And then you would have turned left or right out of the drive.
Um, hang on. Left
And then when you walked to and from the house that night, can you tell us what path you would have walked?
from the back door here down this little path here to the back door.
And there are doors on either end of that barn, correct?
Well, this is an actual door. The backside is, I guess you'd call it, barn doors where a vehicle or tractor could get in.
And then she tells him he can sit down. And so she talks about the exhibit. On to line 10, you indicated that when you had put the clothing into that trough. And did you burn that night or morning, I guess?
After it was daylight, yes.
Was there anything else that went into the trough to be burned?
the clothing, floor mats, anything in my pockets, the shell casings, cell phones, the DVR. No, not the DVR. The security modem, shoes, and whatnot.
And then you indicated you also tried to destroy the weapons themselves, correct?
Yes,
And you mentioned a grinder. What is that?
it's a cutting tool.
Is that something that was already there in the barn or something you brought into the barn for that purpose?
Um, I don't remember if I went and got it specifically that morning or not. It's possible it could have been in the barn already
Why would it have already been in the barn?
because the barn was being constructed.
And who was constructing the barn?
Myself, my brother, and sometimes a couple other people that we hired to help.
And so, can you tell us how you used the grinder on those weapons?
I remember at least cutting two of them in half, possibly into thirds.
And which two do you recall doing that to?
In half would be the Glock 40 and the 1911. I may have cut the SKS into three parts.
After you cut them, what did you do?
I had cut them with a grinder and attempted to use a cutting torch to melt the rest of the item down. And once I found that I was running out of oxygen or acetylene, I had used the torch to try to at least melt the action of each of the weapons where the firing pin mechanism is, and the front of the barrel was where the cartridge actually goes into.
And why did you focus your attention on the firing pins in the barrel?
Specifically for those are the areas, I'm sorry. I also focused on the serial number area, but those are the areas of the firearm that can be forensicable.
And can you explain to us what a cutting torch is?
It's a tool that mixes oxygen and acetylene gas to make a high temperature flame to melt metal.
Was that something you had planned to do before you left the night to commit these homicides? Did you plan to destroy the weapons that you had used?
I did.
And can you tell us if, same question, was that cutting torch something that is normally stored in that barn?
I believe I'd put it there for that purpose, but it's not uncommon for it to be there.
So you indicated once you ran out of the fuel or the ability to continue using the cutting torch, you focused on those certain areas and then put it in the duffel bag and dug a hole below the post in the barn, correct?
Yes,
You indicated that after you had all changed your clothes that your dad left with the truck, correct?
yes.
Which truck did he leave with? Was it his truck or the truck that you guys used that night?
The one we used that night.
And you said at the time you did not know where he went.
Correct.
At what point did you find out where he had went?
I'm not sure exactly the date, but it was months later.
Did he return that day after he had left with the truck?
Yes,
And do you have recollection of when that was or how he came back?
I was not present.
Did you ever see the truck again?
No,
So you put everything in this truck to burn and you tried to destroy the weapons and then ultimately buried them. Then what did you do?
after I'd finished burying the duffel bag, it was already daylight at that time, and that's when I'd burned the burn barrel with the remaining clothing and whatnot in it repeatedly until it was nothing but ash.
You said repeatedly. So you had set more than one fire.
No, I just kept having to add fuel to the fire.
Once everything was burned up, what did you do with those items?
I burned them all to ash and put them in the dumpster,
And what dumpster?
the Rumpke green dumpster at our gate.
If so, they pull up an aerial picture and he points out the dumpster. Are you able to describe where it's located?
Yes.
So she
Uh,
asks him to use the pointer. We can just go down because this is all him pointing out.
Yeah.
And so we're going to jump to page 251. I'm sorry, we're going to go 252. So he's pointing out all these different structures that they did use after the homicides. So 252 line 2, and were those structures present on the night of the homicides?
No.
Did you see anywhere in that photo where you have dug a hole for the duffel bag?
Yes.
And they have him point that out. That second view, close to the regular door that you talked about, that would have been closest to the house. Is that correct?
That's the door by the house. This is open to the property.
Okay. And then she jumps down. One question I meant to ask you: when you first went into your home to get dressed because you were in your boxers, was anybody in the home awake at that time?
Yes.
Who was awake?
My mother.
Were any of the children or awake, or either the children, I should say?
No.
And where was your mother in the home when you entered?
I think she was in the kitchen.
Did you have any interaction with her at that time?
No.
Once you had dug the hole and put the duffel bag, do you recall where you got the duffel bag from?
I may have already had it. I don't recall where I actually got it from or how I put it in the barn.
But you dug the hole and you set the post back down. Then what did you do? There's a little back and forth. Jake is a little confused by this question. So we jump down to 254, Biggie, line 6. Did you and your brother dig the hole, or just your brother dig the hole?
No, my brother participated in digging the hole.
And after that had been done, the duffel bag had been placed there. What did you do next?
I took the bag, placed it in the hole, and I proceeded to bury the hole.
And then you indicated you put the post back on top of it.
Yes, I put the stall. It wasn't much of a stall at the time, but I put it back the way it was.
And then you indicated once it was daylight, you burned the items in the trough and put the ashes in the dumpster, correct?
Yes.
What did you do next?
While I was doing all of the burying and the burning, my brother had went to do the morning feed routes for our livestock and gathering tools to put in the back of his pickup. So at the time when I finished, I can't remember exactly what time it was. It was in the morning, and we had went to outside of Lucasville, between Lucasville and Raritan, to prep I think you call it an Amish built building, those portable building things to prep for transport.
And who were you doing that for?
It was, I guess the singular answer would be for my mother.
And tell me about that.
She had, through my grandfather, she had found the building for sale, of which she bought so she could sell it for a profit.
And when you said you were preparing it for it to be moved, is that correct?
Yes.
How long did it take you to get there?
I would say somewhere between 20 or 30 minutes.
And did you, in fact, prepare that building?
We had started to, but we had forgotten our chainsaw, so we had to come back to get the chainsaw.
Do you have any idea the approximate time it was?
I do not.
Did anything happen on your way home?
Yes.
What happened?
Once in that area, there's no signal for our cell phones, or at least for mine. And once we'd got back on State Route 32, my mother had called me to tell me to, as soon as possible, come home.
Did she tell you why?
No.
You mentioned your cell phones. At some point, you retrieved them from your home after returning from committing the homicides.
Yes.
Do you recall where they were?
No.
So your mother calls and tells you to come home as soon as possible. You were already on your way home, though, correct?
Yes.
Do you recall how much longer it took you to get home after she called you?
Probably 10 minutes.
Did anything else happen on your way back?
No.
Did anybody else call you that morning?
Andrew Carson.
There you go. And sorry, I got lost for a second. And Andrew Carson, the same person that you had talked to about Corey Holdren's home
Yes.
or where he lived. Okay. And how do you know Andrew Carson?
I met him at a memorial four-wheeler ride I was talking about yesterday.
And can you tell us what the nature of that call was?
He had asked me if I had heard what happened.
And how did you respond to that?
I had told him that I had seen it on the news.
And can you tell us when he talked to you, how was his demeanor? Did he seem to be upset or was he just calling to tell you this?
He seemed shocked.
How long was that conversation, would you say?
A minute or two.
And can you tell us your demeanor during that call?
I'm trying to find the word to describe shockish, mournfulish, kind of blended.
Shockish, mournfulness, and what?
A blend, kind of a blend of the two. I was in shock and I was mourning.
And do you recall anything else you said to him during that call?
No,
Did your brother say anything to Andrew at that time?
no.
Do you remember where you were when you got that phone call?
I believe I was in the front yard or under the patio, somewhere in that area.
Once you guys got back to the home, where did you go and what did you do?
I'm assuming you're saying from the,
After you had forgotten your chainsaw and you'd returned to your residence.
we had entered the house and watched the news broadcast.
Who was present when you were watching the news broadcast?
Myself, my brother, my mother, my father.
At that time, were either of your children awake?
Yes,
And where were they and what were they doing?
they were watching cartoons in my brother's room.
And that time that you were watching the news, do you recall what the news was reporting?
It was reporting the homicides.
Did they report how many people had been killed or who had been killed, or was it just that there had been some homicides that had occurred on that road?
I can't quite remember exactly what it was reporting. I do remember a helicopter image of Chris Singer's house.
Was it common for you guys to watch the news or not?
Myself, no.
Was there any conversation amongst you, the four of you at this time?
I can remember bits and pieces, yeah.
What bits and pieces do you recall?
I can remember my dad telling me that the news had stated homicides and he had said something that it was of the rodents or it said something about the rodents.
Anything else you remember at that time?
No.
Can you tell us then? Well, first of all, your daughter was present that day, correct?
Yes.
And she had been at your home on the night of the homicides, correct?
Yes.
She was not present with Hannah.
No.
And can you tell us during that time, what was the general visitation arrangement?
It was generally Saturday to Saturday, 7 weeks on, 7 weeks off. I mean, 7 days. When I traveled, she had Hannah. When I was at home, I had Hannah.
Okay. That particular week when you were going to, or when were you supposed to return her to her mother?
The Friday morning of the homicides around noon.
And that was because you had gotten her a day early the week before.
Yes.
After you're watching the news, what do you do?
After that point, after I had walked outside, that's when Andrew Carson called.
So you talked to him. So I mistook that. I thought you were still in the car. Was anybody else around when you were talking to Andrew?
No.
And what did you do after that?
I had called Chelsea, Brentley's mother, to ask what had happened and if the children was okay.
And by children, who are you referring to?
I was referring to Ruger and Kylie.
And what did you learn at that time?
I can't remember the whole conversation, but I remember she had said something about that they was at the hospital, the Adams County Hospital.
And what did you do as a result of that information?
I went back into the house and told my mother to watch my daughter, and I was going to the hospital to check on the kids.
And did you do that?
I did.
And can you tell us if you talked to anyone while you were there?
Yes.
Who did you talk to?
I talked to at least April Manley.
And what conversation did you have with her?
I can't remember in full, but it was something along the line of what happened. The hospital will not let me see the children or even tell me information about them. So I got the information from her.
And did you express an interest of possibly taking Kylie and taking care of her at that point?
While I was at the hospital,
Yes.
I expressed interest, yes, but the not of custody, not of a custody situation.
And what did you learn?
If I remember correctly, I think April had told me that she had rode down with the children to the hospital, and to her knowledge, they were fine, but they would not let her see her afterwards.
Did you talk at all about Hannah or the others with April at that time?
I mentioned to April something about the others just in general. I do remember asking her or saying something to her about Hannah had tried to call me the night before, but I didn't answer the phone.
And was that true?
That is true.
How long were you there at the hospital?
Not very long.
And what did you do after you left the hospital?
Went home.
And can you tell us, did anybody contact you that day to do a well check on Sophia or any of the following days?
Yes, they did that night.
And do you recall how that was conducted?
A woman from one of the Columbus offices thing, I don't remember exactly who it was. I think it was some kind of agency, wanted to know if she was with me because if she was not, then she would be reported as a missing person.
And what did you tell her?
I told her that in fact she was with me.
Did you go anywhere else on that day?
I don't think so.
Did you ever return to the Amish built building that you were trying to prepare?
I did not.
Can you tell us, did you contact your attorney? When's the first time you contacted your attorney regarding the fact that Hannah had died?
The afternoon of the following day.
So on a Saturday?
Yes.
And how quickly did you file for custody of Sophia?
I'm not sure exactly how fast that went, but I do remember telling him the situation, and he said he would take care of it.
Did you need to use the custody document that you and your mother had forged?
No,
Did you get custody of Sophia?
I did.
Can you tell us at what point did you tell Sophia about what happened to her mother?
About a week or two after.
Did you go to the funerals for any of the victims in this case?
I did.
And what funerals did you go to?
I went to, well, all of them. There was two, one for Gary singular and one for the remainder of the Rodens as a whole.
Did anybody go with you?
Yes,
Who?
both my father and my mother. No, I'm sorry, excuse me. Both my father and my brother.
Did Sophia go to any of the funerals?
No.
Had you met or known Gary prior to the night of the homicides?
Yes.
And how had you met or known him?
The first time I had met Gary was early in Hannah and I's relationship. He had gone with myself, my brother, and Frankie on an early September hunting trip to his cousin's place in Kentucky. I liked Gary.
And had you met and known all the other victims as well?
I did.
And specifically, your relationship with Chris Sr., how would you describe that?
I would describe it very well. I had looked to him as a second father and had hoped that he would have been my father-in-law.
Had he been supportive of you even after you and Hannah stopped seeing each other?
Yes,
How did the decision come about that Kenneth should be killed?
Dad had said something along the lines that because Kenneth was so close to Chris and his immediate family, that if I think he mentioned something that Kenneth could be a loose cannon or something like that, and if he suspected I would have been the one that committed the crime, that he would do something of some sort to take my life as well.
Can you tell us, in the days that followed the homicides, did you, your brother, your father, your mother talk about what happened?
No,
Why not?
I couldn't.
Tell me about that.
I could not bear to think of what I was doing at the time, nor what I had done afterwards without being able to have immense guilt.
And so you avoided talking about it?
I practically tried to erase the memory completely.
Did any of them try to talk to you about it?
I can remember my mother and my father separate times both had said at one point, if you need to talk about anything, that we can talk about it. I told them, no, I got this. I'm bottling it up and don't mention it.
Can you tell us, did you or anyone else in the family have concerns about being listened to? Was
Can
there
you ask me that in a specific time frame?
Yes. Was there a time where you became concerned about that?
Yes.
That was Oh, so I was speaking on Jake's behalf, sorry. And can you tell us when that was?
That was after my first interview with BCI.
And do you recall when that was? How soon after the homicides was that?
I could be mistaken, but I think it was close to September, maybe August.
But at the point that BCI wanted to talk to you or did talk to you, that's when you became concerned about authorities listening to you?
Yes.
Did anybody else share those concerns?
My father is the one who suggested it.
Okay, and so as a result of those concerns, did you guys alter your behaviors at all?
No.
I guess you said you weren't having a lot of conversations. Did you have conversations about the homicides after that point?
Specifically about the homicides, no.
You indicated that you had dug this hole in the barn and buried the weapons that were now cut up and partially destroyed, correct?
Yes.
Can you tell us what did you ultimately do with those?
I had, well, later, my father had said to dig them up at a later date. And he had suggested that we put them in concrete, 5-gallon buckets, and dispose of them to dispose of them in the lake that's on my grandmother's property.
And the lake that's on your grandmother, which grandmother?
Wagner.
And this is the lake you described you would often fish at with the children in the family.
Yes.
And can you tell us what item was that he wanted you to build?
Can you, yes.
And can you tell me more about that? How you said you were going to put the concrete buckets into the lake. How is that going to work?
Him and I had mixed concrete, poured it into empty 5-gallon buckets, placed the remaining of the firearms inside those buckets, and then we placed a chain on top of those to use as weights for a floating geese house.
Okay, and what's a floating geese house?
It's kind of like a chicken coop that floats for the wild geese to nest in.
And then what were you going to do with that?
Transport it to the lake and put it into the lake and then place the concrete weights attached to each corner to hold it in place.
And was this geese house already built or did you have to build it?
I built it.
Did you make the design or just build it?
I designed it.
And did anybody help you with that construction?
Initially, my brother did.
And when you say initially, what do you mean by that?
He started with the platform and he had done something else while I finished it.
And how many of those concrete buckets did you use to put the objects in?
3.
And can you tell us over what period of time did that occur as far as the concrete buckets and building the geese house? Did it take some time for the concrete to set?
Yeah, it takes about 24 hours to harden, so probably a day.
And you were making that geese house for who?
My grandfather.
And that's your dad's father. So after it had been constructed and the concrete buckets had been prepared, what did you guys do?
Then I had my dad come down and we transported it up to the lake.
And who all went that day to take it up to the lake?
I don't remember.
So then Jake asked if he can re-answer the first question. And it was line 13, Biggie, where he picks up. He wants to re-answer a question he just answered.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're good.
I don't think Dad came down to get it. I think we transported it in my truck, I think. I'm pretty sure it was in my truck.
And who all went with you up to the lake then?
My brother, my mother, my daughter, and my nephew.
And you indicated you were giving this to your grandfather. Do you recall what occasion that was for, or if there was an occasion for that?
It was either his birthday or Father's Day.
Do you have recollection as to the date of his birthday?
Shamefully, I do not.
So when you took this up there, was he present for? Did he see the item, I guess?
I remember showing it to him at the house, but the lake is in the valley. He was not as mobile as he used to be. So he's seen it prior going onto the lake, but he did not actually see it at the lake that day.
And so then after you showed it to him, what did you guys do?
We had gone down to the lake and put it into the lake.
Do you remember where in the lake you put it?
Yes, it was if you're looking at it standing from the road, it would be the right closest corner.
Okay. And how did you can you tell us approximately how big that geese house was? Line 10, sorry.
4x8.
And there were also these 3 or 4 concrete buckets.
Now it's 4.
And so how did you get that large of an object into the lake?
I had backed my truck over to it. I think my brother and I and my dad slid it down into the water.
And did you have to situate the buckets as far as you said they were used as anchors, basically?
Yes.
They were attached to the 4 corners.
Yes, I attached them to the 4 corners.
Did they slide into the water or did they have to be maneuvered?
I had to take them in afterwards to, like, myself to an attachment.
And can you tell us how this was a gift for your grandfather if he wasn't able to see it?
Well, he was not able to walk mostly, but he still drove from one side of the farm to the other. So as he drove past the lake, he could pull up and watch the geese fly overhead or land on the lake.
Was that something he liked to do?
Yes, he had a natural love for Canadian geese.
That was a lake you fished at. Did you continue to fish there after that?
Yes,
After that had been placed. And again, that was still in 2016 when you took those out there, correct?
yes,
And to your knowledge, did that geese house and the anchors remain in the lake through the time that you got arrested?
yes.
Can you tell us, does that greenhouse continue to float in that lake?
Are you asking for, to my knowledge, prior to speaking with you?
To your knowledge, when you got arrested in November of 2018, was that geese house still floating on that lake?
Yes.
And you had been there to that lake. How recently had you been there prior to your arrest?
I think it was about 8 to 10 days prior.
They pull up an exhibit, ask if he recognizes the structure in that picture, and he recognizes it as the geese house. And so we're on line 6, Biggie, page 280. What was the color of it when you last saw it floating on the top of the water?
I had painted it white.
They pull out the exhibit, show him a picture. He recognizes it. And what do you recognize that as?
It's one of the concrete buckets that my father and I made.
And can you tell us what items were placed in there?
And that one specifically,
Not that one specifically, but just the buckets that you did use.
the parts of the 3 firearms used and the knife I had broke. And can I ask a specific question on that?
Yes.
Are you asking what I had remembered I had put into at the time, or what I had learned of afterwards?
What you remember putting it in at the time?
Okay. I personally remember putting in the 3 firearms, the knife. Not the knife that I was carrying.
Do you recall any of the shell casings or any of the parts that you used to build the silencers or anything of that nature? If there's an objection, overruled.
No, I do not. Or no, I did not.
You indicated that you and your father did that. Were you present the whole time when he was putting stuff in the concrete? And was he present the whole time you were putting stuff in that concrete?
Yes, him and I both was present the whole time.
Was anybody else present?
No.
Can you tell us regarding Kylie, did you ultimately ask for a paternity test to be done regarding Kylie?
Yes, I did.
And what were those results?
Negative.
And did you learn whose child she was?
Yes.
And whose child was she?
Charlie Gillies?
And is that who Hannah had told you was the father?
Yes.
At some point, did you start a GoFundMe account to raise money to help you with attorney fees?
My mother did.
Do you remember when that would have been?
I think it was in 2016. I'm not sure on that.
But you did not create it.
No.
And do you recall if you guys received any money from it?
I believe I received $1,000.
Okay, so that starts a recess. Just want to say a big hello to Mr. Christopher Stone, who's in chat. You guys have been in our hearts for 6 long years, so I hope you guys have a little bit of easier rest these days with 3 down and 1 to go. So, all right, Biggie, we got to figure out where we're picking up. This is a lot of back and forth here. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Sometimes we have to kind of scroll down to see where we're picking up. We don't want to sit here and read back and forth between both sides.
There's a whole bunch of pages right here. This is when it all started with the big hickok about Jake, the judge being told that they're going to have to possibly show him on camera or the audio, and there's a bunch of pages here that that we can skip. I mean, literally a bunch.
Yeah, I'm trying to find out where we pick up. Bear with us for a second, guys.
I do want to say this real quick because I highlighted this in this just as a note for myself, and this is said by Rob Junk. Allowing the respondent to continue enforcing the media order and underlying, but that's already been taken care of. They can get up and take whatever pictures they want to and take pictures of exhibits and stuff, and that's already been taken care of. And that's very misleading because there's a bunch of exhibits that we weren't allowed to get. But
Yeah,
anyways, let's go ahead.
it's true. I'm still trying to find out where we're picking back up.
To wherever you see my next highlight.
See, that's the thing. I don't see any more highlights.
Because see, they go council, they retired back to the chambers. There's all of this back and forth in chambers.
Okay, so
It's so interesting, but so I mean,
yeah.
we would be here this time next year reading every word of it.
Okay, so I'm on 330 Big E, line 7. Let's see. Okay. We pick back up on page 328, line 10. They talk about Mr. Wagner has objected to being videotaped, filmed, photographed, recorded. So they say they wish to proceed. And then, so Biggie, we're 328, line 22. That's when they asked for Wagner to come back to the court and they asked for the jury. Okay.
Yeah.
All
Keep
right.
going.
329, line 15. Thanks for the patience, guys. I'm going to show you a couple of photographs of the pond lake. What do you refer to that as the Flying W?
Lake.
Okay. They show an exhibit. Can you tell us, does that orient you?
He said, "What's that?"
Okay, I think we're gonna skip through all this technical stuff about where did you put the goose house or geese house in. So 331 at the top. All right, I'd like to talk to you at this time a little bit about a person by the name of Tabitha, once Wagner, Tabitha Clater. Can you tell me who that is?
My ex-sister-in-law.
And do you have any idea when your brother and she were married?
They were married on July 1st, 2012.
And do you know when that marriage ended?
When? Oh, November or whenever she left, or when the actual divorce happened.
When she left, I guess.
It would be November 10th or 11th of 2014.
All right. So can you tell us regarding the night that she left, were you present that night?
I was.
Okay, and can you tell us approximately what time the events that led up to her departure happened? Was it morning, afternoon, evening?
It was dark and I was in the kitchen.
Can you tell us, did she get into an argument with George?
Yes, she did.
Did you see her do anything physically to George?
I saw her hit him. Well, you could call it that.
Well, describe what you're talking about.
I don't I don't know how to describe it, but in how to describe that, I don't mean I don't mean this an offense because you're a woman, but when women usually get in a hysterical state, they sort of start like slapping you with both hands in like a head type thing, like an emotional craze, maybe similar to that.
So you're saying smacking him or
I'm not necessarily sure if her hands were open or fisted, but she was in a state, I'll say.
and who else was present at that time?
My mother and Hannah. Oh, and George, obviously.
And where was George standing when you're observing that happening?
He was just inside the bedroom.
Whose bedroom?
George's.
So was he in the doorway or someplace else in the
The kitchen is directly across from his bedroom. So
Oh,
the
sorry.
door the doorway being open, you can see directly into the kitchen.
And can you tell us what happened next?
let's see here. Myself, my mother, and Hannah was in the kitchen with Bullvine and Sophia. Both were in their high chairs. After their argument, still ongoing argument, she had stomped into the kitchen and said she was leaving and tried to yank Bullvine out of the high chair. She, I'm going to use the word forcibly, yanked him out of the high chair while George was telling her she was not going to take him. And as she was doing that, she had gone, forced herself past my brother, and Bullvine was crying. As she moved through the kitchen door, it has a separate door you can shut to conceal the whole kitchen. That door being open, it kind of sticks out into the kitchen a little bit. And as she was forcing past, she had knocked my nephew Bullvine's head against the door frame, which caused him to wail. And my brother tried to take Bullvine from her, and she had mumbled something of, I don't know, something like, I'm done, fine, something like that, and thrust Bullvine into my brother's arms. Practically dropped him before he even had a hold of him. He didn't drop him, and then stomped out of the door and said, I'm leaving. That's not necessarily a quote, but that's along the lines of what was said.
But she left the residence.
Yeah.
And then what happened?
At that point, I think immediately, or at least within 5 minutes or so, maybe 10 minutes, I had told George that I would go out and look for her, try to talk to her or something. And I had gone outside and I looked in the barn, looked in the very front fence, looked under my truck I was working on, and I could not find her. So I went back to the house and said, I can't find her.
Okay. So Biggie, I think this story really doesn't like vary too much between everybody. So we might be able to save ourselves like 10 pages of reading here. And I think if we skip down to page 338, line 2, that's where he talks about the phone call to 911. That way because this is all what George testified to. It's
Right.
so we'll start with 338 line 2.
So he reluctantly had to file a domestic charge report complaint thing.
Did you call 911?
I didn't make the phone call, so I don't know.
You don't know whether he called 911 or not.
I assume.
Were you present when he made the call?
Yes. I don't remember what was said.
I'm just wondering if that phone call happened while you were still in the truck right near the gas station.
Yes.
Had Tabitha said anything to make you believe she was going to file a police report?
No.
And had you seen George or anybody else assault her?
Did I see George assault her?
Did you
Assault
see?
Tabitha? No.
Yes. Did you hear anyone make any threats to her?
Yes.
Who made
Well,
statements that you're talking about?
my mother.
And what statement was that?
She had said in her frustration, as Tabitha was going out the door, she had thrown her hands up, said, That's it. I'm getting my gun.
Does your mom own a gun?
She does.
And would that have been something Tabitha heard? There is an objection. And so you encourage your brother to call the police and file a report against Tabitha because you were concerned she was going to call and do the same, such as file a police report, correct?
Yes,
Did the police come?
they did.
And to your knowledge, was a complaint made by George against Tabitha?
I'm not sure. I wasn't there when they were actually talking to the police officer.
So you did not talk to the police that night.
I think I may have initially spoke when he arrived. I don't know what the extent of what I spoke to spoke to him about was. This dude's memory. I'm sorry, but I want to put my hands on him. Go ahead.
Yeah. I can, let's see. Did you leave that area?
Um, Not out of sight, but yes.
Did anybody else come to the gas station at that time?
At that point, Hannah had showed up in her vehicle. That's why I was no longer at that point because I was in the car with her.
Did your mother or father or anybody else that you recall?
Not that I remember, no.
Do you know what became of that complaint?
I don't think anything did.
After that, was there a court proceeding regarding custody of Bovine
Yes.
and the divorce, right?
Yes. The divorce or resolution.
And are you aware if George had an attorney or not? And then Parker says, I object to all this, Judge.
And
And it's over.
yes, he's aware that he had a lawyer.
And how are you aware of that?
I can remember him having appointments to go talk to his lawyer.
Okay, I'm just gonna stop for a second. But Cranky, I hear you because I would like to show. I would love for Jake to see what real women do, and it ain't slap. Okay, did you go with him to court on the day of his divorce?
I did not.
Were you aware or not whether or not Tabitha had an attorney?
I don't.
Somebody said they wanted to hear what was argued in sidebars. We have what's good highlighted for later. It's kind of a way. It's not a waste of time, but it's all just normal stuff. There are a couple that get really heated, right, Biggie?
There are there are a couple that are really give you good insight as to what is really going on behind the scenes. Um, Very, very interesting, and a lot of them are just
Yeah.
Canepa and Parker jabbing at each other, but some of them are very, very insightful, in my opinion.
Yeah, I remember you saying that, and I just wanted to because I'm trying to keep a little eye on chat too, but to read every sidebar would take us we would probably still be in between houses the night of if we did. So, uh, they're talking about the divorce, and then down on line 18, do you know the outcome of the custody order regarding a Bovine? There's an objection, and then he can answer.
Yes,
And how? Are you aware?
over here, overheard the outcome when my mother and George was talking about it.
And can you tell us what was your understanding of the custody arrangements?
Objection.
Just here's like, I'll permit it. No, he
Um,
said, yeah, he says the way the question is asked, I'm going to overrule. So, um, Canepa said, what did you overhear them saying? That goes down to 344 line 2.
well, I'm going to say,
Oh, yeah, my bad. You were made aware of the outcome of the proceedings, correct?
yes,
And you and George continued to live together after that proceeding was final, correct?
yes,
And specifically at that time, you were living at Peterson.
yes,
Were you present any time that Tabitha would exercise visitation rights with Bovine?
yes.
And do you know where those occurred?
The times I was present, the majority was in the front yard, but some was in the house on Peterson.
Were you aware of any time that she had visitation where it wasn't at your address or with one of you present?
Objection.
Of course. That could be the see if we included all the objections, we could turn that into a drinking game, and then we would have lost everybody about 8 minutes in. So we'll take that one at a time. Are you aware of any times that occurred not at Peterson, meaning the visitation?
Objection.
Yeah, there's a lot of objections here, guys. Let's scroll down because this is all back and forth arguing for pages and pages. So the top of page 349, Big E, while you lived at Peterson Road, let's go after Tabitha had left. Who stayed in which bedroom?
My mother's bedroom was upstairs. My bedroom was upstairs, and still my brother's bedroom was downstairs.
And while you were at Peterson, would anybody else stay in your bedroom with you?
Well, I mean, during the relationship, it was myself and Hannah.
Did Sophia stay in there when Hannah was with you?
Just me and Sophia. Yes, I'm sorry.
So it was always you and Sophia, and during the relationship, also Hannah. Is that fair?
Yes.
And then you said your mother's bedroom was also upstairs.
Yes.
And who would stay in that bedroom with her?
The times that Dad was there, he did, and I would say mostly my nephew Bullvine.
So if your dad was there, would Bullvine also be in the bedroom?
Sometimes he didn't like sharing bed space
So if your dad was there and Bullvine did not sleep in that room, where would Bullvine sleep?
in George's room.
And can you tell us where the stairs are in relation to George's room?
The outside of the wall.
So the stairs ran alongside the wall of his bedroom.
So standing in the doorway of the kitchen, you would looking through into the house. Then George's bedroom would be on the bottom on the right hand side, and on that left hand wall would be the stairs.
During that time, you indicated that Tabitha and George got married in July of 2012. Was there ever a time that you or anyone else in the home believed she had poisoned someone in the house, food poisoning or anything else?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
I don't remember the incident very well. I do remember how Tabitha had an argument of some kind early in the week. And after my brother had come home from the road the day before, I was supposed to go out. I believe that it was discussed somehow that Tabitha was supposed to, I can't remember it very well. That may have faded from my memory. But somehow or another, after I went on the road, a day or so afterwards, both my mom and George, and I don't know if, no, I don't think it was Hannah. Maybe, maybe not. And Bullvine all had at least symptoms such as a severe stomach virus close to food poisoning or such, or whatever, that lasted the whole week. I was gone, but yet Tabitha, she didn't.
And she had prepared food or something, or why was she suspicious? Was it just because of the fact that she did not have a virus?
Objection.
Of course. How do you know that Tabitha was suspected?
My brother told me.
And can you tell if there was another time she was suspected of stealing money?
Objection.
Of course. Okay, so they go back and forth about this for quite a while. 355 Big E, line 6.
Can you can you educate me on specifically the meaning of accused? Now let me just soak that in for just 3 seconds, okay? Accused. Let me accused. 1, 2, 3. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're
Does
still
that
going.
mean per se I'm directly coming to you and accusing you to your face? Or if I'm telling someone else that I'm accusing someone else of telling somebody? Which one are you saying?
Either one, whether she was accused directly or whether she was accused in conversation with other people.
Objection.
Of course.
Oh,
So
it was overruled. I am not aware of a time she was accused face to face, but she had been accused of stealing money. Yes.
can you tell me about that? When and what were the circumstances?
I can't give great detail. There was multiple times. The only details I can remember is when Tabitha and both my mother worked for my grandmother for her organization called the Crystal Springs Home, a home for the mentally impaired. And my mother had went into an appointment of some kind with one of the clients and left her purse inside the car with Tabitha. But after she had got home that evening, there was supposedly like 100 or a couple $100 missing from a certain area that my mother kept hidden away in her purse. And several other times it happened similar to that, both in home and out, not just my mom's purse, but also money that my mother and we all had kept in like a little coffee can inside the house. And even one time from boy, not to remember much, he sure remembers a lot, huh?
Yeah.
And even one time from what do you call that thing? A woman's wallet, I guess you call it. Not a purse, but a little boxy thing women carry. Hannah had a pink one that I had bought her and apparently had put like 5, 10, 15, something like that in it at one time. It had mysteriously come up missing a day or so. But those, other than that, that's the only thing I can detail or detail I can detailably or detail remember.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe this might be, do you think this is a good point to stop Biggie?
Um,
What do you think? Do you want to keep going for just
I,
because we're about to get into Alaska and that's kind of something. Why don't we finish this part and then when we get to the Alaska question, we'll end it there and pick up next time. So
yeah, because don't be mad, y'all, but we're not going to do Alaska. That was beat to death during lives on
yeah, and
TV.
what we're gonna do really is in the next day or two, really kind of fine tune just the things between Jake and Angela moving forward that we don't know a lot about. So, like, we're not going to cover the arsons with Angela. We can tell you guys ad nauseum what happened. So,
Yeah,
we're really getting into just the meat because otherwise we'll be doing these till like Jesus sounds the trumpets. These are long. So let's finish this little part and then we'll go. Thanks to everybody who's donated. Dixie Chicken, you appreciate that last donation. That was very generous. Everybody for your generosity. So let's go to 357 line 5. Was there a time when anybody actually observed her stealing or was it just suspicion? Page 357, you're gonna start up at 10.
I do remember some. I don't know if it was George or Mom. Somebody had said they was going to. I don't know if they said the term set a trap to see if it was actually happening, but I don't remember if it was actually done or what the outcome was.
So, I don't really wanna get into Tabitha's history. Jake was aware of what happened to her when she was young, and
Yeah,
jumping
we don't need to put that back out there.
no, I've blessed Tabitha's heart. Her and, Beth both have had their most painful parts of their life broadcast for everybody to see. We don't need to hear it again. Um, can you tell us if you were interested or not in preventing Tabitha from having visits with Bullvine unsupervised?
Specifically unsupervised?
Yes.
Yes.
Going back to the homicides, at some point around the 1 year anniversary of the homicides, does BCI begin to make contact with you again?
Yes.
You talked about a month or so after the homicide, you were contacted, and that's when you started worrying about people listening or hearing conversations. Was that the only time you were contacted by BCI until the 1 year anniversary?
I'm not sure on that.
So let me ask you a different way. When did you go to Alaska?
May of 2017.
Before you went to Alaska, did BCI make contact with you?
Yes.
Do you remember any of them?
I believe the first one I met was Agent Stefan or Stefan. May have been first name, last name. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Okay.
There was a couple others. I cannot remember names. And the one I had the most contact with is Agent Scheider, which is present.
And do you recall when Agent Stefan was meeting with you, anything he wanted from you at that time?
I do remember a meeting that occurred in my front yard, and he did request my cell phone.
And did you give him your cell phone at that time?
I did not.
And was anybody else present with you at that time? Anyone from your family in the front yard?
I do not think so. No,
Did anybody else ask for your cell phone after that?
no,
Ultimately, did you have to provide your cell phone to BCI?
yes.
Do you recall when that was?
I don't remember the timing, but I do remember the event.
Was that before you had gone to Alaska?
Yes,
Do you recall how close in time that was to when you went to Alaska?
within a couple months.
Prior to going to Alaska and even prior to the homicide, do you recall Googling places to live in Alaska specifically on that phone?
Before the homicides?
Yes.
No,
You don't recall that?
no, I do not.
Okay. So, can you tell us, have you ever been to Alaska before May of 2017?
Yes,
When?
I believe it was in August of 2007. It may have been '06.
And did you have some interest in going back to Alaska?
Yes,
And from when? From the first time you went there or sometime after that?
from the first time.
Okay. So I think we'll stop here. We've been going for an hour and a half. And so what we'll do is we'll try to get in another one this week. I am going to maybe just kind of take it a little easier this week. I still have to get my Christmas tree up for my kids, y'all. They're like, "You got your studio decorated for your listeners, but like we got nothing in the living room." So I'm going to do that, but we're probably going to try to fit in a couple of more lives this week since it's a little laid back unless something crazy breaks. I just feel like it's so important to get this out there because this is the biggest part of the trial that we were denied the chance to see, and we all have our issues with that. It's very bizarre, but I think it's important to know too that how cold these people were when it came to 8 human beings. I mean, these are 8 lives. It's just
Yeah,
one
I,
one
I
blows my mind.
I
But
can't do justice to how Jake sounded on the sounded up there in the chair. I mean, like like I said in the live the other night, he just he's just monotone,
yeah, it
just
it blows my mind because somebody who claims to be Pastor Wagner, uh, still talks about these murders as if he is recalling a crazy book he read, and this is what he did. It's weird. I don't know what he has going on up here, but it's scary stuff because there's not an ounce of remorse. And I remember you texting me after breaks and saying, "Oh my God, this guy's like stone cold."
yeah,
So,
yeah. Uh,
and Mr. Stone in chat has been so nice telling our listeners some things. So we appreciate him hanging out with us. And he mentioned too about Miss Geneva Roden, who has suffered such an unimaginable loss, 2 sons, 3 grandkids, a daughter-in-law she loved, a nephew. And he talks about how she's still the rock of that family and is still moving forward. So that woman, if I could give her a big fat hug, I would probably just hug her for 5 minutes. But just a good family, you can tell the love that they still have for these 8 members that have been gone for 6 years now. And I think that speaks volumes. So,
And Chris, if you would ever like to come on, I'll sure get out of the way, my man. If you want to use you,
yeah, well,
I'll get out of the way in a heartbeat.
and we need to get word to Tabitha. She needs to find somebody that she trusts and get a book written about her experiences. And I would love to see her and Bullvine be able to sit back and enjoy some life because it's been crazy. And then one other thing is I was thinking the other day about Frankie's house. You think about bad enough what they did, and you've got little Ruger in the bed, but then you think they leave this poor child who is old enough to know things in a house for hours with 2 dead parents that are covered
Yeah,
in blood. And it just every time you think you have been shocked by this story, I can think about things that I've known for 6 years and it still just shocks me all over. It's such an unimaginable case. And
yeah.
anyway, so we're
It started out, and then we'll get off here. But it literally, when Miss Canepa stood up in her opening statement and said that Jake had repositioned Hannah's body to make sure the baby could still feed. That was literally drop a coffee mug on the floor like, oh my God.
I'm not sure why I just super zoomed in on myself. Yeah, no, that I have to say that may be some of the most disturbing testimony that I've ever read. I don't think that was in the leaked part, was it? Maybe it was.
I didn't listen to it.
That
I don't.
has to be some of the most disturbing testimony from a cold killer I've ever heard. And the reasoning and the logic behind that blows. I don't even know how he came to that. But anyways, it's just thank goodness he will never see the light of day. They can
Yeah.
lock him away in a dungeon and then he'll be one of those people that we may think of when some documentary pops up about the case in 5 years. And so anyways, all right, thank you guys for watching. Appreciate
Yeah.
all y'all. And we'll be back probably in a day or two. We're really going to focus on getting this condensed down to where we're just like rapid fire. And so yeah, so stay tuned. We're going to get through these probably maybe three more lives, 4 more lives at the most. So and then we'll figure out what we're going to do from there.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, and thank everybody in the chat.
You guys are awesome. I
Appreciate
love all
you,
y'all. Now my kids are going to be like, "Can we put our tree up?"
and thank you to all the mods.
Yes, the mods. They are so awesome. They keep all the bots out and keep it going, and we appreciate all them. And they're my people. So, all right, guys, we'll see you soon. Hope you have a good rest of your evening.
All right.